We're here this morning interviewing Paul Pence.
Morning, Bob.
Good to have you here. Tell me, sir, where were you born? And were you born in the hospital?
Yes, I was born in a hospital in Charleston, West Virginia, 1931, August the 3rd.
Who were your parents and grandparents, and what kind of work did they do?
Well, my parents were Clifford and Ruth Pence. I was the firstborn. And my dad, he was a coal miner. He started working in the coal mines when he was 15 years old, and he worked there for 40 years. And at age 55, he moved to Michigan and became a custodian at Okemos High School. My mother was just a full-time housewife. She never worked, and she was a great housekeeper and a great mom, and raised a family.
You were blessed. Do you know anything of your ancestors? How they came to West Virginia, or?
Well, I don't know a lot about them. I know that my great-grandfather, my maternal great-grandfather, was a Methodist minister, and he was killed as a pedestrian. He was hit by a car and killed. I never met him. He died before I was born. My other great-grandfather, I understand, ran a store. He ran a grocery store. And that's about all I know. I know my grandfather was a coal miner, my paternal grandfather. And also my maternal grandfather, he was a electrical engineer, and most of his work was done in the mines. I never met my maternal grandfather, but he died long before I was born.
Could you describe for me the house that you grew up in and where you lived in those younger days?
Yes, we lived at a place outside of Charleston, a rural area. It's called Campbell's Creek. And Campbell's Creek was a creek that was about 15 miles long, and there were branches that ran off of this creek. They called them hollows. And I happened to live up Coal Fork Hollow, and that was about 5 miles up Campbell's Creek. And I lived in a very simple house. It was made out of just rough wood, not painted but whitewashed. Back then, a lot of the houses, they mixed up some kind of a white mixture and took a big brush and just painted the old rough wood, and even painted the trees around that. And where we lived, we never owned a house. We didn't pay any rent, and we didn't own a house. The coal companies owned the land around there. And a person could go and build a house and raise their family, and they never paid any rent. They never owned the house. But if you ever decided to move, you could sell what they called possession. Somebody would want to buy your house, and maybe they would offer you $200 for the possession of the house. And I remember my dad never owned a house until after I went to college, and he bought his first house. And at that time, it was great because where I had been raised as a child, we didn't have electricity, we didn't have running water. We burned coal for heat and for cooking, and I can still remember the old cook stove that my mother had. We burned coal in there, and it had on the side, it had a container for water. You could have hot water all the time. And above the stove were what they called warmers. You had any warm over food, you could put it up there and keep it warm. And I don't know how they controlled the temperature of that oven, but my mother was a great baker. She baked lots of pies all the time and cakes and things. And life was sure different than what it is now.
What was it like living there then?
Well, it was hard times. My dad worked awfully hard, to keep everything going. And of course, we didn't have running water. We had a well. My dad had to dig a well. It was, I don't know, probably 20 feet deep and walled it up with stones. And we would have a bucket with a big rope, and we'd swing that bucket until it would drop, and we'd fill it with water. And of course, we didn't have electricity, so we used that well a lot for refrigeration. We would put the milk and butter in a pan and lower it down where it was really cool down along the water. So life was different.
How did most of the families there make their living?
I think most of them were coal miners. There were a few who were in sales. There was a few who worked at a chemical plant there called DuPont, which was not too far from where I lived. But most of the men around there were coal miners.
How many brothers and sisters did you have? What was it like growing up with them?
I had two brothers that lived and one sister. I had one brother that died shortly after birth. He died the same day that he was born. My mother had 4 boys in 4 years. I was born in 31, and my next brother was born 15 months later in 32. And then the little boy that died, he was born in 34. And then my brother Troy was born in 35. And then my sister came along 13 years after I was born. And so she was the baby of the family. And the earliest thing I can remember in life was my little brother died. I was just 1 month shy of 3 years old. And I can remember when he died, the funeral director brought a little white casket to the home. They didn't take him to the funeral home, they just brought the casket to the home. And they dressed him up and put him in that casket, and the pastor came in and had a funeral service right at the house, and then he was buried. But the only thing I can remember about that, I can remember my grandmother lifting me up to look at that baby. That just stayed in my mind all those years. And that's the earliest thing in life I can remember.
I think you told me once you had a brother who was bitten by a snake.
No, that was my uncle.
Your uncle?
That was my dad's youngest brother. He was 8 years old, and they were up on the side of the hill, several of the boys chasing chipmunks. They had a dog, chased chipmunks. And they told Leroy to run around on the other side of the rock pile to make sure that chipmunk didn't run out of there. And when he started running around there, he stepped on this big rattlesnake. It bit him on the leg, and the boys brought him off the hill, and by the time the doctor got there, he was already delirious. The venom had really taken its toll, and he lived through the night and died early the next morning.
That's sad. What was your earliest schooling like?
Well, I went to an elementary school. It was actually elementary and junior high. I went all 9 years in the same building. We didn't have kindergarten, so I started out in the first grade at age 6 and went through. Of course, you know, we didn't have the technology they have today, but we had good teachers, and I always enjoyed school. It was always fun.
What schools did you attend, and what teachers do you remember?
Well, the elementary and junior high was called Midway School. It was about 1.5 miles from where I lived, and I walked there every day to school. We didn't have a school bus at that point. I didn't ride a school bus until I went to high school, which high school was probably 10 miles away. But I really enjoyed school and enjoyed all of my teachers, and I can remember an awful lot of my teachers from beginning. I don't remember the first grade too much, but I can remember several things that happened in the second grade. And I remember in the second grade, I had perfect attendance, and the teacher gave me a little bow and arrow set at the end of the year, and I really prized that. And so I tried every year then to have perfect attendance, and in the last 11 years of school, starting with the second grade, I missed 1 day of school, and that was in the 8th grade. And I had stayed overnight with my grandmother, and I had a little cold or something. My grandmother kept me home. And if I'd been home, my mother would have sent me to school. She was really upset that my grandmother kept me home that day. My grandmother said, "Well, that's silly, except for you'd be going to school every day." But I only had one absent in the last 11 years of school.
Are there any particular experiences you remember of those high school years?
In high school?
Yes. Or your early years?
Well, I remember in elementary school some things that happened. I remember I got 2 paddlings in school. In the second grade, we went out for recess, and when the teacher blew the whistle, we all had to run and get in line. And I can remember it was muddy that day, and one of the boys came running and jumped in the mud and splashed mud on us, you know. And so we told the teacher on him. And she took him inside and paddled him. And while she was up in there paddling, several of us were putting our foot in his footprint that he had made. And she looked out the window, and I think she was upset because we tattled on this boy. So anyway, she just said, well, you boys were stepping in the mud too because I saw you. So she paddled me. And then I got paddled in the 4th grade. The teacher had a rule that when she was out of the room, no one was to be out of their seat. Well, this happened to be Valentine's Day, and the girl next to me asked me if I would put a Valentine in the box for her. The teacher happened to be out of the room. I said, sure. I got up, and as I was dropping the Valentine in the box, the door opened, the teacher walked in. She said, what are you doing out of your seat? I explained to her, but that wasn't good enough. The rule was you were not to be out of your seat, so I got a paddle in that for that. Only 2 paddlings I ever got. I didn't think I deserved either one. Probably there were other times when I did deserve paddlings that I didn't get, though.
How would you compare the schools you went to the schools of today?
Well, a lot different. At our school, we had strict discipline. Today, discipline is very lax. Of course, technology is so different now, you know. Back then, everything was written out. We didn't have computers and all of the materials that they have today.
What activities were you involved in high school?
In high school, I was in the band. I played a baritone in the marching band. I was in chorus. I loved to sing and was in chorus. And I was in student council all my years. The final year, the senior year, I served as president of the student council, which was quite an honor. In the second semester of the 11th grade, they had a campaign, and you know, there'd be always 2 candidates running for that position. And I had a campaign manager. I had to give a campaign speech, and fortunately, I won the position, and that was quite an honor because as it was senior year, I got to make a lot of announcements over the PA system and conducted all the student council meetings. And that was the big thing for me in high school.
Were there some people or events that influenced you during those years?
Well, I had great teachers. I wasn't a very good student. I wasn't all that interested. I never thought I'd go to college, so I took classes that were fun classes. In my senior year, I had an English class, I had chorus, band, and all afternoon in a shop class. So that wasn't very good classes to prepare me for college, but I had no idea I'd ever go to college.
At the time you completed high school, what were your plans for the future?
Just to get a job and go to work. I was 17 when I graduated, and I was waiting until 18 and try to find a job.
So what did you do?
I just had a fun summer. I dug a lot of ginseng down there. We'd go through the mountains and dig ginseng, hunt groundhogs, and just play with the boys. Had a great time waiting until I turned 18 to try to get a job. And I was going to camp meetings during the summer and just having a great time.
But that changed. You came to Michigan in time and attended Owasso Bible College. How'd that come about?
Well, at the camp meeting, I met this young man who had been to Owasso the prior year. And he asked me, he said, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to try to find a job. He said, why don't you come to Owasso College? I said, no. I said, I don't plan to be a preacher. He said, well, you don't have to be a preacher. He said, they have a junior college there. And he said, boy, he said, it's just so much fun. He said, and all the students have a great time. He said, you'd really enjoy that. And I said, well, I don't have any money to go to college, and I don't have much interest in it. And he said, well, I can get you a job. He said, there's a contractor up there. He said he pays $1 an hour, and he hires all the students that want to work for him. And boy, $1 an hour back then sounded pretty good. So I went home and I talked to my parents about it. And they were all excited. They thought, man, that would be great for him to go to Bible school. So my dad went to Charleston, went to a savings and loan association and borrowed $50 for me to go to college. And So that's how this young man who talked me into it later became my brother-in-law. We married sisters. And
that was a long distance.
Yes.
In late 40s, early 50s. How did you physically get to Owasso?
Well, there was a young man from Charleston. He was from the Charleston Pilgrim Holiness Church. And he had been in the service. And he was going to go, and so he said I could ride with him. And he had a Jeep. And there was another fellow from our church that went. So the three of us got in this Jeep. And we left early one morning. And we drove all day and all night. I didn't think I would ever get to Michigan. Here I was. I just had turned 18. I had never been out of the state of West Virginia. That's the first trip I ever made out of the state. And, you know, from my home to Owasso was probably 450 miles. And with that old Jeep, we just stopped often, and we had to go through all these towns that had, they didn't have the freeways back then. I remember it must have taken us an hour and a half to get through Columbus, Ohio, because there was so many stoplights. But we had a good time coming, and we got to Owasso early the next morning and got checked in.
What were your plans for your future once you got to Owasso?
You know, I really didn't have any plans then. I just thought, well, I'll just take a couple of years of college and then try maybe I'll get a better job. And I wasn't all that interested in school. I took easy classes and didn't do very well. And, got a job full-time working in Flint at Buick. And so I skipped a lot of classes because I worked at night and I was sleepy the next morning, so I just sleep in. And I went there for about 2 years, got about a year and a half of credits there.
In time, you transferred from Owasso to Olivet Nazarene University. What brought on that change?
Well, actually, I had been in the service, and the GI Bill was available. When I got out of service, I went right back to my previous job, working for the state of West Virginia, and I liked that. But my brother Troy kept talking to me. Troy had enrolled at Morris Harvey College there in Charleston, and he was enjoying it, and he kept telling me, he said, we ought to go away to a Christian college. And he finally talked me into going, and so after I'd been out of service a couple of years, we took off and went to Olivet.
But your time in the military, were you drafted? Did you volunteer?
Yes, that's why I left Owasso when I did. My mother knew the draft was getting there, and she wanted me to come home for a few months before it. And so she had talked to a person who said they would hire me, State of West Virginia Road Commission, testing soil. So I left Owasso then and took that job of working in the laboratory, testing soil. And actually, I worked there almost a year before I got drafted. And I thought I'd be drafted much sooner, but it was about a year and a half that I worked, and I really enjoyed that job. I didn't make much money; they didn't pay much, but it was a fun job. Then I got drafted in the Army. I went to Fort Leonard Wood and did 16 weeks of basic training. Then they transferred me to Fort Belvoir, Virginia, near Washington, D.C., to go to school in the engineering school. And I was taught to be a water supply specialist. And the Korean War was on then, and I had orders to go to Korea. And for some unknown reason, of course I think God had something to do with it, they cut my orders and said they didn't need any water specialists at that time, and we were to report for headquarters for reassignment. And so when I went for reassignment, they assigned me to work in the School of Engineering running a projector, showing training films. And so I spent the rest of my service time showing training films. And that was interesting because I was showing films about all of these new missiles that were being developed. It sounded like Star Wars back then, because they didn't have those things. And we had a lot of generals and high-ranking officers that would come in, you know, and I would show these films. They cleared me for top secret, you know, to show these films, but they didn't mean anything to me because I just couldn't understand, you know, how they could make those missiles that would fly so straight and so far. But I had a real good experience when I went to Fort Belvoir. I arrived there on a Sunday afternoon, and I went to the day room, and the television was on, and there was a Christian program called Hand to Heaven. And the pastor of that church, I knew him from Owasso. He had been a field representative in Owasso. And they had great singing, great preaching, and I thought, I'm going to go to that church. So I wrote down the address, and the next Sunday, I went to that church, and the pastor recognized me from my days in Owasso. I had sang in a quartet in Owasso, and I had traveled some with him on meetings, you know, where he was trying to raise money for the college. So he recognized me, and immediately he brought the music director over and introduced me and said, this guy sings. He sang for me in Owasso. So they invited me home to their for dinner that day, and they were telling me all about their television program. This program was originating in Washington, D.C., and they programmed it every Sunday afternoon, and it was, I guess, the first religious broadcast on television. You know, we're talking back in 1952. And so that they invited me home for dinner, and they wanted me to go to the practice with them that afternoon. And that evening I was singing on the television program with them. I was singing in the choir, and that was an enjoyable time that I spent at that church and singing every Sunday on the program. And they made a videotape of every service, and because it was regionally broadcasted, and they sent that to Owasso, so that it was on a Owasso station. So my brother Troy was going to school in Owasso, and he was able to see me the following Sunday when that program aired in Owasso.
Fantastic.
So that was interesting.
So you get out of the military and you go to Olivet Nazarene University.
Yes.
How did that change your life? Change the course of your life?
Well, it was at Olivet that I decided what I wanted to do with my life. I was a very serious student when I went to Olivet. I made good grades, worked hard, studied, and really enjoyed my years at Olivet. It really changed my life.
Somewhere along the line you met a lady named Liz. She became your life companion. Where'd you two first meet?
Well, we met in Owasso. We never dated, but I always thought Liz was a very nice girl, and we socialized some together. But we had a lot of skating over there, ice skating. They would flood the parks over there, and I didn't know a thing about ice skating, but Liz was pretty good at it, and so she got a big laugh out of me, you know, trying to learn to skate, falling down and everything. But anyway, after I left Owasso, went to the Army, one day I got a letter from her, and she had seen my name in one of the youth papers or something that had listed some soldiers and their addresses and so forth. So she wrote me a friendly letter saying, thought maybe I'd like to hear from a college pal or something. And I was really pleased to get that letter, and so I answered her letter and told her to write me again, and first thing you know, we're writing every day. And so then I made a trip to Owasso to see her for the first date. And then she went to Olivet then, and of course I went back to West Virginia, and we just kind of grew apart, quit writing, and she graduated from Olivet in 1955. Well, it was in 56 that I decided to go to Olivet, thinking that she was long gone. I didn't know what had happened to her. And when I got to Olivet, lo and behold, she was still around. She was working there. And the guy who had talked me into going to Owasso, who I told you became my brother-in-law, he was pastoring a church in Elkhart, Indiana. And he came down one weekend to visit, and he invited Troy and me to come and spend the next weekend with him at Elkhart, Indiana, go to their church and spend the weekend. So we agreed to do that, and he said, by the way, would you mind giving Liz and her sister a ride? I said, well, I'd be happy to. So anyway, that weekend, Liz and I got back together, and we've been together now for 54 years.
Bless you. Lansing, Michigan's quite a ways from Kankakee, Illinois. What brought you here?
Looking for a job. Troy and I had done our student teaching in the area of business education. Thought we were going to go to West Virginia to teach. And we had gone down on spring break and talked to the superintendent down there. And he promised us good jobs. And so he said, you don't have to be in any hurry. He said, we need lots of young men. He said, so sometime before school starts, just come on down and we'll get you placed. So after graduation, Troy and I continued to work in Kankakee. And we took a little trip, went out to Yellowstone, did some fishing, and had a good time. So about the 1st of August, we decided we better go down and see what our assignments were going to be. When we got down there, the guy said, boy, he said, things really haven't opened up very well in high school. He said, I want to put you guys in elementary school. I told Troy, I said, I don't want to be in elementary school, do you? And he said, no. I said, we're not trained for that. I said, let's go up to Michigan and see if we can find a job. You know, I had some contacts here because of my days in Owasso. And so, come to find out, my brother-in-law had come to Lansing to work on his doctorate at Michigan State. And then we found out that one of the fellows that I had gone to school with at Owasso was now had an administrative position with the Lansing School District. So we contacted him, and he said, well, I'm sure they don't have any openings this late in business, but he said, I know they need special ed teachers. And I said, well, what's that? And he said, he explained to me, and I said, oh, I don't think, we're not trained for that. And he said, well, he said, actually, he said, those are good jobs. He said, these are really nice kids that you work with. He said, they're in high school. He said, it's a job placement program. You try to get these kids jobs and so forth. And he said, it wouldn't hurt to go talk to the director of special ed. And so we did, and he really wanted us to come. And we signed a contract then, and we got $1,000 more on our contract than what we've gotten in West Virginia. West Virginia was going to pay us $3,400, and we got $4,400 to come to Michigan. So we had to go out to Michigan State then and get approval for temporary certification because we weren't certified in special ed. But we started teaching, and we started working on our masters in special ed, and we stayed with that for our entire career then.
What did you do when you first came to Lansing? Where did you teach? Where did you live?
Well, I rented a house over on the north side for a year, and then we bought a house in 1960 over on the west side, over in the Waverly district, and we lived there for I believe 9 years or maybe 10, and then we bought our home we presently live in Holt, and we started teaching immediately when we came.
What buildings were you in?
I started out at Eastern High School. I taught there 1 year, and then they asked me to transfer over to Sexton and be the coordinator for the program. Troy, he started out at Everett, and he taught there many years, and after that he transferred to Harry Hill and to Dwight Rich. But I spent the rest of my time at Sexton. I was there 28 years.
Was Lansing when you first came to Lansing, I'm sure it was quite different than it is today. What were the big differences, would you think, between the Lansing you came to and the Lansing that we know today?
Well, certainly there wasn't nearly as many people. When I moved to the house out west of town in the Waverly area, everything west of me was fields. And now that's where Myers is and all of those, and First Church of the Nazarene. I lived right close there. And so everything was built up. Traffic, there wasn't much traffic. And of course things were so much cheaper, you know. I remember we used to get hamburger 3 pound for $1. store called Beeman's, I think it was, right there on the north side of town. And I don't think there was as much crime, too, in Michigan. Everything seemed to be a lot safer than...
What about the auto industry?
Well, the auto industry was going great. Oldsmobile was really putting out a lot of cars. I think that's the only cars that were made in Lansing at that time. But Oldsmobile was a great car.
I'm interested in your relationship with Jesus Christ. When did you first become a believer?
Well, I was raised in the church, and we were always having revivals. We'd have a couple revivals every year. And I remember I must have been about 10 or 11 years old, and we were having a revival. And I was sitting next to my mother, and my mother just leaned over and said, "Paul, don't you think it's time now that you really give your heart to the Lord?" I'd always claimed to be a Christian, but I really hadn't made that commitment. And so I nodded yes, and I went up to the altar, and I remember they all came up and prayed with me, and that's when I really accepted the Lord as my Savior.
Were there some people besides your mother who were godly influences on you?
Oh, yes. We had Sunday school teachers that I can remember when I was just little that I really admired. We had some of the older people in church that really took us under their wing and really supported us. And of course, my dad was a great influence on my life too. He was a wonderful Christian man.
And I believe that was the Pilgrim Holiness Church.
Yes, it was a Pilgrim Holiness Church. One of the great pastors we had was a lady. We called her Sister Green. And she was a tremendous lady, and she had a lot of influence on my life. I was just a young teenager at the time. She was our pastor, and she was really great with the youth.
When did you first come to South Church?
I came to the South Church in '86, so it's been about 25 years now. It'll be 25 years this summer that I came here.
What was it that attracted you to South Church?
Well, I'd been a Wesleyan all my life. Actually, Pilgrim Holiness Church merged with the Wesleyan Methodist Church and became the Wesleyan Church. And that happened, I think, sometime in the 70s, maybe 80s. Yeah, 70s. And things were really going bad in our church. It just seemed like people were discouraged and was leaving. And so Ann had been the music director, Troy's wife. And so I didn't know that she was negotiating about the position here at South Church, but after it was settled, then Troy told me, he said, we're going to be going over to South Church, south of Nazarene. And I was pretty discouraged anyway with the church over there and the lack of growth and people leaving. And so I said, well, I'm going somewhere too then. And he said, where do you think you'll go? I said, I don't know. I'm going to try several different places. And he said, well, why don't you come over and try South Nazarene? And I said, I will. So I came here the first Sunday, and the people were so friendly and so accepting. I never went anywhere else. When I came to this church, I thought I'd gone to heaven. It was a great, great church. I liked the pastor. I liked all the people. I knew a few people when I came here. I had gone to school, of course, with the Delbridges, and I knew Cal Crane, and there was already a few people that already left the church. I know the Overmeyers had already come here, and the Cochrans. And so I knew a few people here then.
So you've been here about 25 years now.
Yes.
Do you see a difference between the church you came to and the church that we have now? If so, what might those changes be?
Well, I think we've had a lot of changes. For one thing, the Sunday night services has really changed. When I first came here, we had great Sunday evening services. We used to run about 500 on Sunday morning, and on Sunday night we'd have about 300.
Wow.
And we had the choir singing every Sunday night. We'd always have 2 specials. We'd have some great testimonies. And that was that was really one of my favorite services was the evening service. We usually had a short devotional by the pastor, and sometimes we'd have the congregation, participating, and so I really miss the Sunday evening great services that we had.
If you could make one change in South Church of today, what might that change be? Would it be the Sunday night service? What might it be?
Well, that would certainly be the Sunday night services, and I'd also like to see us having revivals. We haven't had a revival in our church here now for several years that I can recall, and we used to always have an annual revival where we'd have some great speakers come in and really challenge us, for a closer walk. And I think we need to get back to having revivals in our churches.
What roles have you played in our church besides, I know you like to sing and you're in the choir, what else have you done?
Well, I served on the church board for 12 years. The last 11 years at that time, I was the secretary of the board. And we experienced a lot of changes during that time. That's when we built the new building, and I've narrated a lot of the programs that we've had here, the musicals and things, and I've always enjoyed that.
I know you love music. When do you first remember becoming involved in music?
Well, when I learned to talk. My mother was a church pianist. My dad led the singing at this Pilgrim Holiness Church. And my mother started me singing when I was just real small, just learning to talk. And my brother Don, we're only 15 months apart, and we would sing together in church. And then as I got to be a teenager, we formed a quartet in our church, and we got to go to different churches and sing. And then when I was in Owasso, I was a member of a quartet. And so singing has always been important to me. I've always enjoyed singing.
I've heard you tell stories about going back to West Virginia and meeting up with some of your former classmates. What are those gatherings like?
Wonderful. We, like I say, after I graduated, I didn't spend much time in West Virginia. I was either in Owasso or in the service or at Olivet. So I kind of lost track of all my classmates. But then we had a 20th reunion in 1969. I graduated in 49, so in 69 we had our 20th reunion. And I was able to get together with a lot of our classmates and found out that they were just really great people. Most of them were Christians. And so they started having reunions then every 5 years. And I've attended all of those reunions. And then in the last several years, just our class has a annual gathering where we just gather together and at one of the ladies' house and have a potluck and just a great time. And what I've really enjoyed about this group is they've never allowed any alcoholic beverages at our reunions. Most reunions, end up with a lot of people drinking and everything. The reunion committee said from the very start, we will never have alcoholic beverages served at our reunions. And so we've had these reunions where people get up and testify, talk about how good God has been to them, and then we end up singing hymns, Christian songs. That we had our 60th reunion here just a couple of years ago. And we had hired for a disc jockey, a Christian artist, and he played all Christian music. So he invited some of us to come up and sing. So we got a men's trio together, and we were singing all these old hymns. And then some of the ladies joined us, and we just had a great time. And you don't find many class reunions. No one was offended. Everyone seemed to enjoy the music and enjoy the testimonies, and so there's a group that meet every Monday down there, every Monday evening for dinner. And anytime I'm down there on Monday, I always join them, and it's always a good time.
What other interests or involvements or hobbies do you have besides singing in church?
Well, I think most people know I love to fish. I fish year round. I love ice fishing. I like fishing in the spring and summer. And I enjoy hunting. Mostly deer hunting now. I used to hunt anything. Rabbits, squirrels, groundhogs, possums. But now it's mostly deer hunting. And I enjoy bowling. I enjoy all sports, watching sports.
You and Liz have 2 adopted children, a daughter and a son. Tell me about them.
Yeah, we've been married for about 9 years, and we were childless, and the prospects of having children looked pretty bleak, so we decided that we would look into adoption. And that was more Liz's idea than mine. We both had good teaching jobs, and we were footloose and fancy-free, do whatever we wanted to, and I wasn't all that thrilled about, taking on a child, but Liz really wanted to, and so we went down in the Platte for a baby. We wanted a young baby, and during the course of all the interviews that we had to go through, the social worker determined that I really would like a boy, and so our first adopted was a boy. His name is Jim. He graduated from Olivet, and then he got his MBA degree, and he now lives in California and has a good job working for Apple Computers. And then 2 years later, we adopted our daughter, Tamara, and she graduated from Point Loma out in California, Nazarene school. And she's married to a wonderful man. They live down in the Nashville area, and they have my only grandchild, Griffin, who is now 9 years old, who is the joy of my life. And those two kids that we adopted, they absolutely were the joy of our life. Our lives totally revolved around those kids. They were wonderful children. They've become wonderful adults, and I've heard people say, well, I don't know if you could love your adopted children as well as your own. Let me tell you, there's no way I could love kids any more than I love those 2 kids.
You're blessed. Did you ever have a point in your life where you questioned your faith or wavered in it?
Yes. My mother lost her eyesight when she was 51 years old. And my mother had been a wonderful Christian lady. Like I say, she was a pianist at church. She taught Sunday school, very active in the church. And she had lost one eye when she was just a little girl. She was hit by a motorcycle. She was out in the street playing, a motorcycle hit her. And that eye was so damaged it had to be removed, and she had an artificial eye. The other eye, she never talked about it. As kids, we never knew that she had an artificial eye. And the year that Troy and I graduated from college, she'd come out to our graduation, and she noticed then that she was having some problems with that eye, but never said anything about it. She didn't understand what was going on. And so when Troy and I came home to spend some time before we came to Lansing, we went on a camping trip. One day she could see, the next day she couldn't see. She lost her eye. She had a detached retina that was completely detached. And we had to bring her home then. I took her in, and the ophthalmologist, he looked in her eye and said, well, he would do surgery, but said it didn't look very good. So I remember they did the surgery on her, and I was driving home from the hospital. I'd been with her. And that scripture came to me, all good things work together for good to them that love the Lord. And I was thinking about that, I thought, what a bunch of baloney. Here my mother has been a Christian all of her life and has been active in the church, and this is what happened, and this works for her good? I don't believe that. And I was really upset over that, and I kept thinking about that, all things work together for good to them that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. But you know, in time, I couldn't see the whole picture. God could. He could see what was going to happen to my mother. And she became, I mean, her faith grew stronger. She handled that disability with grace, with character, and she became really a testimony to many people. I think people are in heaven today because of the influence my mother had on them with her disability. She learned to take care of the grandchildren, to love them, to be a great wife to my father, and God really worked a miracle in her life with her blindness. So you can imagine, you know, one day you can see and then never see again. And she was totally blind. She couldn't see the sun. She could look up, she could feel the warmth of the sun, couldn't even see the sun. She was totally blind. But she learned so much, to do so many things, and really took care of her family. And she was a mother of great faith. But that changed my mind about, I firmly believe now that all things do work together. If we could just see the big picture. God knew what was in store. You know, I don't know. If my mother hadn't lost her eyesight, who knows? Maybe she'd have lost her salvation and gone out in sin. I don't know. And God knows, but God sees the big picture, and we don't.
You're one of our older saints. What advice might you give to someone 20 years, 30 years younger than you that would help them understand about growing older?
Well, growing older isn't a bad thing. Certainly better than the alternative. But I think a person needs to try to be graceful as they grow older. You lose a lot of your physical capabilities, but you know, you can mature in so many ways, and you can be a help to others along the way. And I think we become wiser as we get older.
Maybe you've answered my next question. Has your outlook on life or your relationship with the Lord been affected by your getting older?
Well, I think I've grown closer to the Lord. That old saying always comes to mind, only one life will soon be done. Only what's done for Christ will last, you know. And I think that's something that any person should live by.
If you could share one thing with an unbeliever about walking with the Lord, something you've learned, what might that be?
Well, I think we need to focus on the good things. Make up your mind, you know, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And I think a person has to be determined. There's all kinds of pitfalls along the way, and you just need to really move close to the Lord and just try to grow spiritually every day and have a positive outlook on life.
Thank you, Paul. God bless you.
Thank you.